The world around me. What he did shattered me in places I didn't know could break.
The family and friends of 4 murdered University of Idaho students gave heartbreaking testimony as they stared down the killer, including a surviving roommate of the victims, Dylan Mortensen.
He took away birthdays, graduations, celebrations, and all the memories that we were supposed to make. All of it is gone. And all the people who loved them are just left to carry that weight forever.
It's been nearly 3 years since Madison Mogen, Kaylee Goncalves, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin were found stabbed to death at their off-campus home in Moscow, Idaho.
Details have come to light regarding the gruesome 2022 Idaho murders. Less than a month after Bryan Kohberger received 4 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole for the murders of Ethan Chapin, Xana Kernodle, Madison Mogen, and Kaylee Goncalves, newly released police documents reveal more information about the early morning of November 13, 2022, when the killings occurred at an off-campus University of Idaho house. A document released by the Idaho State Police per News Nation states that sometime in the early morning hours, one of the roommates in the house was awoken and opened her room door and heard a male say, "It's okay, Kaylee, I'm here for you," and crying. She then shut the door. A short while later, she opened her door again and saw someone approximately 5 foot 10 inches tall, dressed in black with a ski mask, standing in the kitchen. E-News has reached out to the Idaho State Police and has not yet heard back. During the sentencing of Kohberger last month, surviving roommate Dylan Mortensen, who authorities previously confirmed had briefly encountered the murderer while he was in the residence, shared an impact statement detailing how her life is forever changed by what she experienced that night. The 21-year-old said at the July 23rd sentencing, "What he did shattered me in places I didn't know could break. I couldn't be alone. I had to sleep in my mom's bed because I was too terrified to close my eyes, terrified that if I blinked, someone might be there." Investigators have also released information on what Bryan kept stored in his phone leading up to the night of his horrific crimes. Officials revealed that he didn't remove any of his photos, which were mostly comprised of shirtless selfies and unidentified women in various states of undress. Describing some of the images he took of himself, investigator Hannah Barnhart told People magazine in an interview published August 15th, lots of him posing half-naked in the mirror while flexing. And as for the snaps he stored of other women, Barnhart noted that the photo subjects were often in bikinis and others who were completely naked. She added these were all cache files saved to his device.
Moscow, Idaho, was the kind of town where everyone knew each other, where students walked safely through campus late at night, and neighbors greeted one another with a friendly wave. It was quiet, peaceful, the kind of place that made you feel at home. But that calm shattered on the morning of November 13, 2022. For young students at the University of Idaho were found brutally murdered in their off-campus rental home. And suddenly, a sense of safety that had been taken for granted vanished overnight. The community was left in shock, trying to process a horror that seemed impossible in such a small, tight-knit town. The house on King Road became the center of a nightmare. Police swarmed the scene, their flashlights cutting through the early morning fog, documenting every detail, every sign of struggle. Inside, the reality was chilling. For students, lives cut short in the most violent way imaginable. 2 roommates who had been in the house were unharmed, but the questions, why them, why this, why here, hung heavy in the air. The investigators were left with more questions than answers, and the community with an unshakable fear. As news spread, parents and students alike clutched their phones, seeking updates, sharing rumors, desperate for reassurance. The town that once felt like a sanctuary now felt exposed, vulnerable, haunted by the unknown. It was a moment that would linger in the minds of everyone who lived there, a moment that marked the beginning of a story no one could have anticipated. If you're following this chilling case, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss the next turn in this investigation. Stick with me because the story of what happened in that small town is far from over. And as the investigation began, the first hints of a suspect were still hidden in plain sight, waiting to emerge from the shadows. The investigation into the murders of the 4 students quickly became one of the most intense and high-profile cases in Idaho history. Authorities scoured the crime scene, looking for any clue, any fragment that could lead them to the person responsible. But the case was like a puzzle with missing pieces. There was no clear motive, no witnesses, no immediate suspects. The surviving roommates could only describe a quiet night, unaware of the terror that had unfolded in their own home. Investigators began piecing together what little they had. A white Hyundai Elantra had been seen near the house that night. A sliding kitchen door had been left unlocked. A single knife sheath, out of place and ominous, was discovered near the scene. Every detail mattered, and every small observation became a critical part of the investigation. Forensic teams worked around the clock, examining fingerprints, DNA, and surveillance footage, but the mystery only deepened. The small college town, once so safe and familiar, felt the weight of fear pressing down on it. Students stopped walking alone, doors were double-locked, and neighbors watched each other with suspicion. Meanwhile, the investigation stretched across counties, state lines, and even online databases as law enforcement tried to track the perpetrator. The pressure was immense, and the community demanded answers. Stick with me, and if this case grips you like it gripped the country, hit that share button so more people can hear the story. Every lead mattered, every tip could be the key. And slowly, through tireless detective work, investigators began to see patterns emerge. A connection would surface, a name would begin to take shape, and soon, the quiet life of Moscow would collide with a truth far darker than anyone could have imagined. Next, the focus would shift to a young criminology student, someone who seemed ordinary on the surface, but whose life was about to become inseparable from this horrifying crime. Bryan Kohberger seemed, at first glance, like any other graduate student. He was quiet, studious, pursuing a Ph.D. in criminology just a few miles away at Washington State University. Neighbors described him as polite, reserved, almost invisible in his routine. But behind that ordinary facade, investigators began to uncover a trail that would link him to one of the most shocking crimes in recent memory. The breakthrough came through genetic genealogy, a technique that had solved cold cases across the country. DNA collected from a knife sheath at the crime scene was run through databases, tracing familial connections. And slowly, Kohberger's name emerged. The sheath itself was unique, a model that investigators discovered he had purchased months before the murders. Surveillance footage showed a white Hyundai Elantra, matching a car he had access to, near the scene around the time of the killings. Cell phone data placed him in the vicinity. Each piece of evidence, small on its own, began to form a picture that was impossible to ignore. Authorities quietly watched and collected more information, building a case before making any public announcements. Friends and acquaintances were stunned when the news eventually broke. Someone they had known, someone studying how criminals think, was now the prime suspect in a horrific quadruple homicide. If you're still with us in this dark descent, don't forget to subscribe for more true crime breakdowns. Every detail matters in this case, and the story was far from over. The tension escalated as law enforcement prepared to act. And on a cold morning in Pennsylvania, Bryan Kohberger was arrested at his parents' home, ending weeks of speculation and starting the next chapter of a case that would captivate the nation. But even as he was taken into custody, questions remained. How could someone so seemingly ordinary commit such unspeakable acts? And what had driven him to that quiet house on King Road, in a town that had once felt so safe? The arrest of Bryan Kohberger sent shockwaves through Moscow, Idaho, and across the country. As he was extradited to Idaho, the reality of the crime became impossible to ignore. Court documents revealed chilling details. Knives, black clothing, gloves, and masks seized from his family home, along with phone records and surveillance footage that placed him near the victim's house. The small college town watched in disbelief as the suspect, once so ordinary in appearance, became the face of unimaginable horror. The media swarmed the courthouse. Families of the victims waited with a mixture of grief and apprehension, knowing that the trial could either bring justice or prolong their suffering. Prosecutors prepared a death penalty case, outlining the brutality of the murders and the evidence tying Kohberger to every detail. Yet, as the courtroom drama unfolded, The human side of the story was impossible to ignore. Parents, friends, and neighbors were forced to relive that fateful night, their pain now part of the public record. As the trial date approached, a twist shocked the nation. Kohberger changed his plea to guilty on all counts. By doing so, he avoided the death penalty, agreeing instead to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Families were divided. Some relieved that a long trial and its publicity were avoided. Others frustrated that justice did not include the ultimate sentence. The courtroom was tense, silent, as he admitted to the murders, stripping the case of uncertainty but leaving questions about motive unanswered. If this case is pulling you deeper, tap that like button so the algorithm can share this story with other true crime fans. The plea marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another, the slow process of healing, the reckoning with grief, and the lingering shock of a crime with no clear reason. And even as life sentences were handed down, the shadow of that night continued to haunt the community, leaving everyone wondering how something so dark could have happened in a town that had once felt completely safe. The sentencing of Bryan Kohberger brought a somber closure to a case that had gripped an entire nation. In a packed courtroom, the judge handed down 4 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, plus additional years for burglary. The families of the victims sat quietly, their grief raw, their relief mixed with anger that the death penalty would not be pursued. Some expressed frustration that the plea deal left unanswered questions, while others welcomed the chance to avoid the prolonged trauma of a full trial. Outside the courthouse, the town of Moscow struggled to reconcile with the horror that had invaded its streets. The King Road house, the scene of the murders, was slated for demolition, a symbolic step toward healing. Students and residents lit candles, held vigils, and shared memories of the young lives lost, trying to reclaim some sense of safety and community. Yet, despite the sentences and legal closure, a chilling reality remained. The motive behind the killings was never revealed, leaving a void that no court ruling could fill. Questions lingered in every corner. Why were 2 roommates spared while 4 were murdered? How could someone so seemingly ordinary commit such violent acts? And perhaps most haunting of all, what had driven Bryan Kohberger to that house on that night? The answers remained elusive, and the scars, both emotional and communal, were lasting. Thank you for staying with me through this difficult story. If you want more in-depth true crime cases explored with this level of detail, make sure to subscribe and share to support the channel. Remember the victims: Ethan, Kaylee, Xana, and Madison, and the community forever changed by one night of incomprehensible violence. This case is a stark reminder that evil can sometimes hide behind the most ordinary faces, and that the search for understanding is often as haunting as the crime itself.